carried a whole other set of complications. And I remember growing up and struggling with that aspect of my identity.
You can easily say, I am not tolerating anything, because it's a beautiful feeling.
But it was a very deeply embedded story of trauma in my family, in my little family, and I didn't really fully understand it. I just knew that it was always there. And so my entire academic career was geared towards a career in the Canadian Foreign Service. And I found myself in Washington and had all these plans, and then boom, I meet my husband, who's a journalist.
Do you consider yourself connected to little Nancy? I think you're going to see me in your next class.
Very good. It's happening on Saturday, and it's my last class of the season. So Come soon, come quickly, or you'll have to wait until September. None of us wants to be ruled by the old story. Most of us are, because every emotion will have a root, will have a story linked to it.
Welcome, Nancy, to a heartfelt podcast, and thank you so much for being part of the healing story. I am so delighted to have you here today. I just want to talk a bit about your Instagram profile, which is such a representation of your passion towards Kundalini. All the white, the poses, it shows that you have so much passion towards the Kundalini yoga. I'm curious to know more from you. What exactly is Kundalini yoga, and how did you start this journey? How did you get into it?
Thank you, Dina. Thank you for having me. And it's a wonderful question, a very big question. So I'll try to answer it as best as I can. Kundalini yoga is the yoga of awareness. And when we refer to the Kundalini energy, we're really referring to the sort of purest energy of our consciousness in this lifetime. I feel passionate about Kundalini yoga because it keeps us in a continuous and constant state of self-inquiry. It's not for everybody because it can be quite confrontational in that sense. It's very dynamic. It combines the breath and the mantra. It has a very active meditation practice. So it's almost like a one-stop for everything in a single practice. And that is the brilliance and intelligence of the teachings. When I came to know about Kundalini Yoga about 15 or 16 years ago now, I really didn't know much about it. I remember having practiced other schools before, Iyengar, Ashtanga, Hatha, and then somebody invited me to have an experience of Kundalini Yoga. There was a teacher that was sort of lightly teaching in Dubai at the time. And I remember having my first experience and asking myself at the end of that class, what is this? I mean, it's like, it's everything. You know, it's the breath, it's the movement, it's the mantra. And I feel different. I feel stronger. I feel like something has really shifted in 90 minutes. And I just asked for more, you know, and there was no studio that supplied the teachings at the time. So I invited this teacher to just come, continue the teachings in my garden and invite literally whoever she wanted. And that's how I began my practice. And the deeper I went into it, the more I just felt strongly about it. And don't even ask me how I became a teacher. I remember her saying a few years into it, you should train. And meeting certain people at the time, I was sort of progressing on a simultaneous journey of self-healing through a whole series of other modalities, and just finding myself going down that road. And it was a long journey. I had no intention to teach. And sort of a year after my training, I remember having my mom in town and her saying to me, I'd like to learn about this thing that you've been practicing. And I said, Yalla, let's try it. And I gave her a class, and she turned to me and she was like, wow, is something, and you're really good at it, and you need to share this. And even though there was something probably kind of nudging me inside and saying, you know, there's something here. There's something here for you to share. I think my mom's sort of comment at the time was a little bit of a tipping point. And before I knew it, more and more people just kept coming to me and saying, can you share whatever it is that you're learning? Can you, whatever it is, you look radiant. It's obviously had an impact on your life. What is it? Share more. And that's how I started sharing. And I went from no classes to 6 classes a week. And I was teaching in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And suddenly there were more people who wanted to know more, who wanted to go deeper. And then I continued and trained and continued and trained. And now I'm a trainer of teachers, because I believe that strongly in the practice and its power to transform people's lives. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Such an inspiring story, Nancy. And I'm curious to know more when you say that Kundalini is a confrontational experience.
So we do a lot of the postures with the eyes closed. Okay, so that already is changing everything, because it's not an outward experience of kind of looking at your beautiful teacher, going into a perfect asana and trying to imitate and practice that. You close your eyes and you go inward, and you sometimes hold your gaze at the point between your 2 eyebrows, which is known as the third eye. And that's it. It's between you and you. And so you're going into your Sufi grinds and you're moving into your warrior poses, you know, in and out of this kind of open and closed eye state. And during that time, you start to feel things and you start to experience things. And this is why when people have a 90-minute practice, they'll come afterwards and they'll say, you know, I felt like I wanted to cry between poses, or I felt really angry between poses, or I had an aha moment between poses, because it helps you to develop your capacity to process emotion, to develop a capacity to witness and to know yourself. So not everybody wants to go there.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody wants to live with that level of self-inquiry. Not everybody wants to kind of open the skeletons in the closet and actually see the baggage for what it is. And when I say it's confrontational, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yes. And exactly what you said. Not everyone is willing to open that closet. And that's really a core concept around healing and around going down that route or path, is that you get to really know stuff about yourself. You get to really inquire and find answers. And there's so much inspiration that lies in that. What was the experience like? What was the transformation like?
Just with Kundalini yoga or in general?
In general.
In general.
In general.
In general.
Because you mentioned Kundalini was a part of
a bigger process.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, I'll rewind a little bit because I do feel it's relevant. I was born into a family of 2 Palestinian parents in Canada in the 1970s. And it was a time when there weren't a lot of immigrants, especially from the Arab world. It was sort of before and during the civil war in Lebanon. And so, if you were Arab, you were sort of like the only kind of colored kid on the block. And, forget being Palestinian as well. That carried a whole other set of complications. And I remember growing up and struggling with that aspect of my identity, understanding my father's story, understanding my mother's story. Both of them lived through the Nakba, the catastrophe, lost their homes, lost everything. My mother's family went to Lebanon. My father's family moved to the West Bank. But it was a very deeply embedded story of trauma in my family, in my little family, and I didn't really fully understand it. I just knew that it was always there. And so for years, I struggled with revealing my identity as a Palestinian in Canada, with getting comfortable with that and asking my parents, well, where should I tell people I'm from? Because there's no Palestine on the map, you know? And my dad would say, well, just tell them you're from the Holy Land. So I started to tell people I was from the Holy Land. And then that would open up a whole other Pandora's box. And then I was a Jordanian national, and then I would start to tell people I'm Jordanian. And, you know, my mom said, well, you know, I grew up in Lebanon and I'm also Lebanese. So why don't you just tell people you're Lebanese? So I grew up with this, but I'm also Canadian. Confusion, let's say. Confusion, and also, dare I say, a little bit of, you know, misunderstanding, even shame around that identity, because also the Palestinians in the West and, you know, at the time, because of the PLO and their activities, there was a lot of misunderstanding, let's say. And I really struggled. I struggled. And I kind of woke up one day and realized actually that there was also a story of injustice there. Or at least that's what I perceived to be injustice. And I found myself going down a certain academic path, a certain route, and found myself thinking I want to go into journalism and then diplomacy, because I need to do something about this. You know, this is something that I must do something about. If I can go into government, then I can affect change. And so my entire academic career was geared towards a career in the Canadian Foreign Service. And I found myself in Washington and had all these plans. And then boom, I meet my husband, who's a journalist. Interestingly enough, you know, an ex-war correspondent. And we come together, and so many of my plans shift and change. And without going into the sort of specific details of that, I then found myself here in Dubai, mainly driven by his career. And saying, okay, let's try this out. And finding myself in the corporate world, but in a place that I had never aspired to be part of or be in. Fast forward several years, and I have 3 children. I've been married for, 5-6 years. And I distinctly remember 2005, right after my second was born, struggling in my marriage, struggling to kind of just, even have a day with my partner where we weren't kind of disagreeing about something and saying something's got to give, something's got to change. We need to do something different, because whatever it is that we're doing, we're bringing different things to the table. We've got to do something about it. And that was when we, as a couple, began our therapeutic journey. And so that set off a whole series of kind of individual and collective journeys together, which took me to the point 15 years ago, essentially, when I would be open enough to receive the teachings of Kundalini Yoga and really recognize that they were highly, highly complementary to my healing journey. So I was simultaneously healing my marriage, healing my relationship with identity, healing my relationship with being a mother, and, having been catapulted into this career that wasn't for me, because I'd made certain life choices, and healing those aspects of me that weren't yet integrated, and realizing actually that there were no injustices, but in fact that this is exactly what was meant for me. This journey of you in this life, in this human form, is everything that you have been given and have been handed in order to learn and to grow and to transform. And so that is quite a radical way of living life, And I choose to live my life in that way now. But it took me many, many years to come to terms with suffering, pain, perceptions of quote unquote right or wrong. There is no right or wrong. There's only our perception of what is right or wrong. And realizing also the opaqueness of life and how so many of us just live in our own movies and don't really have a capacity to observe that passing show. And so I was interested in the ingredients for what supports us in learning to observe, in creating space, in creating distance, in understanding the human psyche, motivated above all by my own understanding of self.
If there is one thing that you learned about Nancy during that journey, what would it be?
One thing that I learned about Nancy, what would it be? It would be that I don't need to try so hard. That there was a whole aspect of me based on my social programs and conditioning that helped to catapult me into being a real doer in life. One of these people who just did and got things done and achieved and hyperachieved and overachieved. And it's taken me years to unpack that bag and to accept that there is a skill in doing, and it's a beautiful thing, but I don't need to kind of overextend myself to the degree that I used to. And that it's okay to just be. When you begin to accept that and accept that you may fall flat on your face and that it's okay. Because if you fall flat on your face, it's an opportunity to learn and to grow forward. So there was a big transition for me from moving essentially from a space of self-judgment every time I fell flat on my face again to saying, no, it's okay. This has come into your life because you are meant to learn from it. And this adversity is an opportunity to absolutely grow forward. And this is going to help you to get stronger. And that essentially is what resilience is, right? It's growing forward. It's learning from opportunities. It's learning from adversity. So for me, there was a big, big evolution in my relationship with adversity. And that for me is sort of what I take with me. Yes, I've had relapses. I mean, are there parts of me that still want to overdo? Yeah, there is a voice in my mind that is much quieter, but it's still a voice, because I don't think that those parts of us ever completely go away. It's just the degree to which we learn to train the mind and train ourselves to absolutely observe. And this is why, for example, Kundalini Yoga is so potent, because we work with japas, we work with mantras, replace the story in the mind with a mantra. Of course, outside of yoga, we use affirmations instead of the story in the mind. And we understand the power of meditation. What is meditation? Meditation is a practice that is meant to help us to clear the subconscious garbage. If we can accept that is an innate part of being human, that rubbish is always going to be lurking around in some shape or form if we don't tame it, if we don't train the mind to serve the highest version of ourselves, then ultimately it's going to serve our instincts, because that's the nature of being human. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Of course, it answers the question. And I want to say that realizing that the voice does not go away is a huge part of the healing process. It's not about not hearing the voice anymore or eliminating the voice.
Correct.
It's more on taming that voice, as you said, learning how to walk around that voice and understand it and just have that type of control on how loud is it going to be?
Correct.
Or how low is it going to be?
Correct. This is interesting, right? Because, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to know the voice in my head? What does it mean to actually know what triggers me?
Yes, and that voice of judgment as well. The
Exactly.
self-judgment part that you were talking about, which is an integral part of any struggle that one could pass through, is that self-judgment.
Yes. And it's an interesting thing, there needs to be, there doesn't need to be actually. Everybody is welcome to do whatever they would like. But what we're seeking is to maintain that really high level of questioning around, am I living from the best version of myself, or am I living through my karma, through my stories, through my baggage, through the heaviness, through the traumas that I keep repeating on autopilot? And there's a choice at every turn. Every choice in life can either bring us closer to our dharma or further away. So do I want to develop a more dharmic way of approaching my life? Or am I going to just keep repeating the same patterns over and over and over again? It's not an easy way to live, but it's a very liberating way to live, in fact. With that level of self-awareness, self-scrutiny, understanding, like what does it mean to actually know, well, if I feel sad, or if I feel angry, or if I feel disappointed, can I go back to understand, first to process that emotion, to feel it in my body, to feel the fear or the anger, the disappointment, and then actually go back and inquire and ask myself, is this a familiar emotion? Do I know it? Do I recognize it? Because every emotion will have a root, will have a story linked to it. 9 out of 10 times when you work with people, especially at the level of the body, they will reveal to you that emotion is a long experienced emotion. So disappointment is something we learn at a very young age. Fear, anger, anguish, we learn them all. They're learned emotions. And so when we believe that we're experiencing fear in the moment, when we believe that we're experiencing anger in the moment, actually we're probably just acting out an old story. And can we take ownership of that moment to moment, breath by breath? That is intense, because it's so much easier to blame the other person.
Of course.
It's his fault, it's her fault. Oh my gosh, she said this, she did that, goodness me. But the experience of pain is inside of you. The experience of sadness is inside of you. The experience of rage is inside of you. Where does that come from? It doesn't come from the other person. That person might have pressed a button, linked to your triggers, but that trigger button is inside of you.
And it gets really easy to play victim and
Very,
to blame.
Very easy.
I consider it's a comfort zone.
Absolutely.
For a huge number of people. Talking about the roots of emotions, and which is a topic I am hugely interested in and passionate about. In a sense, rooting a lot of the emotions that happen in today's life back to childhood, or back to certain situations that happened in childhood. So how would you describe your experience in rooting down your emotions and what was happening with you in today's life back to your childhood?
Yeah. So really kind of working with feelings of disappointment, and I've taken every single one of them all the way, and there's still more. Every time I think, okay, I've really exhausted this fear thing, I discover that there might be more. So you take it all the way, and then you take it some more, and you take it some more, and you take it some more. So my relationship with fear, my relationship with disappointment, my relationship with sadness, my relationship with anger, I went all the way back, as far back as I can remember. And I've gone back even beyond myself. I've gone into my parents' pain, and into their parents' pain, and into their parents' pain, and to the pain of being Palestinian and being part of a wider collective of being Palestinian. So yes, have I gone back? Absolutely. Do I continue to go back? Absolutely.
Do you consider yourself connected to little Nancy?
Yes. Yes. Yes, and that has a place for sure. And I like to call it the difference between sort of the inner child and the hidden self. Okay. So there's the inner child that exists inside of all of us. Carl Jung refers to, this inner child in quite depth, and we have this opportunity to kind of know that inner child, to know what makes that inner child tick, to understand the unmet needs of that inner child, and to understand where that inner child might sort of reveal itself in present day circumstances. The hidden self is that aspect of us that we shun, and if we're not careful, can wreak havoc in our lives. So there is definitely something to be said about honoring that inner child. But at another level, there's something to be said about overindulging that inner child, And somewhere in between is the truth. So really understanding what makes that story tick. What were the unmet needs of that child? But at the same time, not allowing the hidden self, that aspect of you, to rule the show. So know the inner child. Don't let the inner child become the hidden self, which is what most of us are allowing to happen. Because once that happens, it just becomes, a free for all. And none of us wants to be ruled by the old story. Most of us are, but the reality is that if we continue to, there comes a point in all of our lives when that old story no longer serves, when we become cognizant that we don't want it anymore, when we come to the realization that enough is enough. I'm going to now put that child to sleep.
What does Nancy need to do more of?
Nancy needs to take more time to rest.
What does Nancy need to do less of?
Nancy needs to do less doing.
What are you tolerating, Nancy?
Nothing really. I don't feel that I'm tolerating anything. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
How much effort and how much work it takes to reach to a point where you can easily say, I am not tolerating anything. Because it's a beautiful feeling.
It is.
To say and feel that I'm not tolerating anything.
Yeah. It's, if you would have asked me a few years ago, I would have said, yeah, there's something that I'm not speaking up about, or there's something that but I really feel that I'm at a stage in my life where I'm not afraid to speak up, and I'm not afraid to face the music, and I'm not afraid to face the challenge, despite the discomfort. And, it could be in my marriage, it could be with my children, it could be with my colleagues, it could be with my students, with my trainees, it could even be with my clients. it's sort of having that sense of, so what? I'm just going to be me right now, and try to be as present, alive, responsive as I can be in this moment.
If you had all the time, energy, and money in the world, what is one thing that you would do?
I would help to create more social enterprises in parts of the world that need it most, serve communities in parts of the world that need it most. I'm particularly interested in the Levant and countries that have been war-torn or faced intensive conflict, like Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Iraq. I really feel that these are countries in deep, deep need, perhaps because I'm from this region. Yeah, help to build communities and help to serve those communities through the many facets of social enterprise. Yeah.
Brilliant. Nancy, thank you so much for joining me today in the podcast, The Healing Story. I was extremely happy to hear everything that you have shared. And you got me really excited to start trying Kundalini Yoga. I think you're going to see me in your next class.
Very good. It's happening on Saturday, and it's my last class of the season. So come soon, come quickly, or you'll have to wait until September. Or have an experience with one of our beautiful, beautiful teachers. Yeah.
I'd love to. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here, Nancy.
Thank you, Dina. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening and sharing.